Guys, today we are going to learn the story of a wise man and a victim of love. How a wise man stops living the life of a wise man to relieve his hatred. Also, we are going to learn what people decide. If you liked the video, then share it. To watch, subscribe to our channel. And leave a comment. This story will be very romantic and moving. Stay until the end of the video. The sun was setting below the Ganges. The wind was a little cold. And the sound of the temple bells was open. A wise man was sitting on the Ganges river. His eyes were closed, as if he was sitting in deep meditation. In that river, a feminine woman came to fill the river. And there were letters of age and experience on her face. She washed herself with the Ganges water and looked at the river for a while. Maybe she remembered the rest of life. Then the wise man opened his eyes and said, "Mother, are you thinking of something?" The woman was surprised, and said with a smile, "That is how the river flows. It never flows. Life is like that. It floats, no matter how many difficulties there are." The wise man got his head right. "You are right. But the river doesn't just float. It floats on your back. Life floats too. It gives us a new shape." The woman looked at the wise man for the first time. There was nothing in his words, only wisdom. She said, "But sometimes it seems like the river floats everything together. Friends, dreams, everything." The wise man smiled, "But some things never float, like memories, love, and the strength of the spirit. All of these float inside us." No matter how much the river floats, she became quiet, as if thinking about something. She said, "You are right. Maybe we shouldn't be afraid of the floating river, but we should learn to float along with it." The wise man got his head right. And the two of them stood looking at the floating river. Two strangers, but life experiences brought them together for a moment. A while later, the victim came out of the river water, and the wise man went back to meditating. For a few days, the victim, whose name was Sudha, would return to the same river. Sometimes to drink water from the river, sometimes just to look at the water. The sages, who called themselves saints, would always stay there, not staying quiet among them. Sometimes they would talk about small things, about life, time, and the confusions of the heart. One day, when the sky was colored yellow, Sudha seemed a little worried. The sage asked, "Mother, why are you sad today?" Sudha said with a smile, "I only remember old things. Sometimes the past gets in the way." The sage said, "The past is just a bridge of memories. We should not stay in it. We should only pass through it." Sudha looked at him. It was the first time he realized that this sage was not only a saint but also a human being. He was getting closer to things, something he had been longing for years. Suddenly, a bright wind came, and the hair of Sudha's garment lifted over the sage's arm. Sudha calmed down and quickly held him. But at that moment, the two gazes met in deep silence. The sage said with a smile, "The wind also reminds us of new relationships." Sometimes, suddenly, Sudha's heart started beating fast. It was the first time he had realized this feeling. This was something different, something he had never thought of. A saint and a sage, is it possible? He calmed down and said, "Relationships? Is it really possible?" The sage took a deep breath. Relationships do not create society, they create feelings. If the sea and the Ganga can meet, then why not both? Sudha calmed down. It was the first time he realized that life was not yet incomplete. Suddenly, new initials were possible. An unknown relationship was forming between them. No name, no line, but both of them could still feel it. One night, the Purnima moon was shining on the waves of the Ganges. The Ganges river was calm. Only the music of the river could be heard. Sudha stood still for a longer time than before. He wanted to say something to Saint Dayananda, but the words failed to flow from his tongue. The sage looked at him intently and said, "Do you have any doubts in your mind?" Sudha opened his mouth. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Sage, if a feeling is created in your mind and not named, then is it incomplete?" The sage was silent for a while. Then he said, "Feelings are never incomplete. They only need acceptance." Sudha looked at him. It was the first time that he saw in her eyes the same feelings that were in his heart. An unknown hindrance, a desire that was outside the rules of his life. "If I say that I am Sudha Rukia, where is your voice? The sage, instead of completing what he said, simply said, Sudha, this path is difficult. Religion, and our own habits. Can we break their bonds? Sudha looked up with tears. I have lived my life according to the wishes of others, sage, but for the first time, I want something for myself. For the first time, I do not want to see life as a task, but as a friendship. The sage had a deep despair in his eyes. He had never imagined this friendship. But now, it was right in front of him. After a while of silence, the sage took a deep breath and said, if the union between the sea and the river Ganga is determined, then why be afraid? But we must have patience so that our feelings are not witnessed. Sudha touched them slowly. A small touch, but with useless words. The sage did not pull his hands back, but for the first time he accepted this touch. The relationship that was growing in Ganga was reaching the eyes of the village. People coming and going from the cattle drive noticed that his wife Sudha was waiting until late. The sage was talking to the sage, and sometimes they both just looked at the river Ganges. The relationship between the sage and his wife was growing. This is a sin. Someone said, Saint Dayananda has done a great deed and now this woman is distracting him. Someone else joined in. Slowly, this friendship turned into opposition. One day, some deep old men from a village came in the cattle. They cornered the sage. Sage, what is happening? You have forgotten the norm of the sage? The sage asked in a harsh voice. The sage replied calmly. Love does not break norms. It shows the purity of the sage. But the people of the village were not ready to accept this. Someone said angrily, if you worship the love of the world, then leave the cattle. Sudha was seeing everything. She was afraid and courageous. She said, if two sages understand each other, help each other, what is the sin? The women of the village cornered him. You are a wife. You should live your life in memory of your husband, and not fall in love with a sage. Sudha was crying. But this time, she was not afraid. She said courageously, being a wife is the end of life. Don't I have the right to love? The people of the village decided in anger. Either the sage leaves the sage, or leave the village. That night, the sage and Sudha were sitting on the bank of the Ganges. There was a question between them. Should I choose love or the traditions of society? Sudha said, if you say so, I will live without you, sage. But I know that this life will be incomplete. The sage took a deep breath. He knew that accepting this love meant leaving the sage, moving away from society. But if he left him, perhaps his soul would be incomplete. A while later, he said with a smile, if society cannot accept love, then we should ask ourselves, not society. Can we accept our love? Sudha saw it in his eyes. For the first time, he was not afraid. He had only one decision. The next morning, when he reached the river, the sage had already stopped. His clothes were there. But the sage was not there. Someone said that the sage had become a sage. Someone said that he would be reborn.